The massive arena was a living, breathing thing. The crowd was wild, shouting, laughing, and cheering as they waited for the next fight. From every corner of the galaxy, beings of all shapes and sizes had come to witness the spectacle. It was the most anticipated event of the year, the Galactic Championship. Mark had never wanted to be here. He had never asked for this. Yet somehow he found himself standing in the middle of the arena with hundreds of eyes fixed on him and the weight of the entire stadium pressing down on his shoulders. It was a harsh, unforgiving place where only the strongest survived and where the weak were laughed at. In the opposite corner of the arena, standing like a mountain of muscle and menace, was Grothak, the reigning champion. A Krelvok warrior feared across the galaxy for his strength and brutality. He had won every match for the past 5 years, crushing his opponents in seconds, and now he was about to face his most unexpected challenger, Mark, a human. Mark felt a surge of doubt flood his chest. He had been chosen not because of skill, but because of a twisted sense of entertainment. A human, just a regular human, against one of the fiercest warriors in the galaxy. The crowd expected it to be a massacre. They expected him to fail. And honestly, Mark wasn't sure how he would survive either. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, echoing through the vast arena. And now the final match of the Galactic Championship. In this corner we have the unstoppable champion, the Krelvok warrior Grothak. The crowd erupted into deafening cheers, and Mark could feel the floor beneath him vibrate with the force of their excitement. And in the opposite corner, the challenger, a human. Let's see if humanity has what it takes. The laughter from the crowd filled Mark's ears, and he felt the color drain from his face. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his hands felt like they might start shaking. Grothak stood tall and terrifying, his red skin gleaming in the arena lights, eyes glowing with the thrill of battle. Mark, on the other hand, was just a man, human, vulnerable, and completely outmatched. "Are you ready, human?" Grothak's voice rumbled, deep and mocking. He didn't even seem to take Mark seriously, as though he knew this would be over before it even began. Mark swallowed hard, but his voice was steady as he replied, "I'm ready." Grothak chuckled darkly, cracking his knuckles. "You're about to find out how much you're not ready." The crowd roared with laughter, and Mark could feel their eyes on him, waiting for the humiliation to begin. The announcer shouted the countdown, 3, 2, 1, fight. The bell rang, and in that instant, Mark knew he had no choice but to fight. He wasn't sure how or why, but he had to stand up. The last few weeks of training had taught him one thing. Survival wasn't about winning, it was about endurance. And maybe, just maybe, if he could outlast Grothak's fury, the galaxy would see something they hadn't expected. A human who wouldn't back down. Without a moment's hesitation, Grothak charged forward like a freight train, his massive fists swinging toward Mark. The speed and power were almost unreal. Mark barely had time to react. He ducked to the side, barely avoiding the crushing blow, but the force of Grothak's punch sent a gust of air that nearly knocked Mark off his feet. The crowd gasped, and Mark's heart pounded even harder in his chest. Grothak was already moving again, his massive fists coming down in quick succession. Mark stumbled backward, dodging as best he could, but the arena was too small and Grothak was too fast. He had been trained for this, for battles, for war, for victory. Mark felt the sting of panic rise, but he pushed it back. He couldn't afford to let fear control him. He had to stay calm, stay focused. He wasn't going to make it out of here alive if he didn't think clearly. Suddenly a thought struck him, his speed. He wasn't a warrior. He didn't have the strength to match Grothak, but if he could outmove him, if he could wear him down. Mark ducked under another punch, feeling the heat of Grothak's fist brush past his face. He ran, using every ounce of energy to keep moving. He didn't know what he was doing yet, but he was learning fast. He darted around Grothak, staying just out of range. The alien warrior's swings were powerful, but they were getting slower, more desperate. The crowd had fallen quiet now. They were watching, waiting for the inevitable, but Mark refused to give in. His mind was racing, his body aching from the effort. He was human. That meant he could feel fear, pain, exhaustion, but it also meant he had something Grothak didn't, resilience. As Grothak swung again, Mark saw his opening. With a sudden burst of speed, he dodged, then kicked Grothak's knee out from under him. Grothak stumbled, his massive body crashing to the ground with a thud. The crowd gasped. For the first time, they were quiet. Mark didn't stop, he didn't wait. This was his moment. He wasn't just surviving, he was fighting back. The arena was silent now. Every eye in the crowd was locked onto Mark as he stood, panting, in the center of the battlefield. Grothak had just fallen, something no one had expected. The Krelvok warrior, the undefeated champion of the Galactic Championship, had stumbled and hit the ground. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he took a quick glance around at the audience. They were still stunned, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Grothak was getting back to his feet, his massive form rising like a mountain, but Mark wasn't going to waste time. This was his chance, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. "Get up, Grothak!" The crowd began to chant, urging the champion to continue the fight. Their voices were no longer mocking, but full of anticipation. They weren't laughing anymore. Now they wanted to see blood. Mark couldn't afford to let the pressure get to him. He focused on Grothak's movements, his eyes scanning for any weakness, any opening. He couldn't win in strength, that was clear. But what he could do was outsmart the Krelvok warrior. He had to. His survival depended on it. Grothak rose, shaking off the fall as though it was nothing. His yellow eyes glowed with fury. "You think you can beat me, human?" His voice was like thunder, reverberating through the arena. Mark didn't respond. He just prepared himself. He felt his legs tense, his body ready to move. With a roar, Grothak lunged forward again, swinging his enormous fist at Mark. Mark dodged, just barely, the punch missing him by inches. The ground shook as Grothak's fist crashed into the arena floor, sending up sparks from the metal floor beneath them. Mark kept his distance, his heart racing. He wasn't fast enough to avoid Grothak forever. He had to take a risk. He had to make Grothak doubt himself. Grothak charged again, his attacks relentless, but this time Mark anticipated his move. As the giant alien swung his arm toward Mark, he ducked and slid between Grothak's legs. The crowd gasped in disbelief, and Mark, using all his strength, kicked the back of Grothak's knee. The Krelvok warrior stumbled again, but this time he didn't fall. Instead, Grothak let out a furious growl. "You're faster than I thought, human, but that won't be enough to beat me." Mark's breath was coming faster now, his body sore from dodging and weaving around the larger fighter. But there was a flicker of hope in his chest. He could do this. He had to. Grothak turned, fury in his eyes, and charged again with even more force. Mark knew this time it wouldn't be enough to just dodge. He had to do more. He had to strike when Grothak was at his weakest. Grothak's foot slammed down with a heavy thud, and Mark darted to the side, using his momentum to launch himself toward the side of Grothak's body. He threw a punch to Grothak's side, hitting the softer area beneath his ribs. Grothak flinched, just a small moment of weakness, but it was enough. Mark followed up with a swift kick to Grothak's side. This time the blow landed harder, making Grothak stumble. The crowd gasped again, and Mark could see the shock on Grothak's face. It wasn't just the pain, it was disbelief. The announcer's voice rang out over the silence of the arena, full of awe. "The human Mark has made Grothak stagger. This is unexpected." Mark didn't stop. He knew if he paused for even a second, Grothak would recover and crush him. He wasn't going to give him the chance. With all his strength, Mark rushed forward, jumping up to land a knee to Grothak's chest. Grothak gasped for air, surprised by the force of the hit. For a moment, it seemed like the Krelvok warrior was completely off balance. Mark used that moment. With a deep breath, he delivered one final, powerful strike, aimed straight at Grothak's jaw. The blow hit hard. Grothak's head snapped back and he staggered, his legs shaking beneath him. For a moment, Mark thought he might have done it. He might have actually taken down Grothak. But the alien warrior didn't go down. Instead, he let out a roar of rage and shook his head, trying to clear the dizziness. Mark, breathless and exhausted, stood his ground. His heart was pounding in his chest, his body aching. The entire stadium seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable. "Get up, Grothak," Mark whispered to himself, more determined than ever. Grothak's eyes were filled with rage as he began to move again, but this time he was slower. This time he was uncertain. Mark's legs were sore, his body bruised, but he felt a spark inside him, a fire he didn't know he had. The crowd, once filled with laughter and mockery, was now dead silent, watching with wide eyes. They weren't sure what was happening anymore. The human wasn't just surviving, he was winning. As Grothak took another step toward him, Mark squared his shoulders and prepared for the next move. He wasn't just going to fight for survival, he was going to win. The tension in the arena was thick enough to cut through with a knife. Mark's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had landed a few hits on Grothak, but the alien warrior was far from defeated. Grothak stood across from him, his breathing heavy, his massive chest heaving as he glared at Mark with fury burning in his golden eyes. The crowd was no longer laughing. The atmosphere had shifted from mockery to something far more serious. Grothak had underestimated him, and now, for the first time, there was doubt in his eyes. Mark felt the ache in his body, every muscle screaming in protest. He wasn't used to this kind of fighting, not this brutal life-or-death kind of battle, but something inside him had clicked. He couldn't back down, not now, not when the eyes of the galaxy were upon him. The announcer's voice rang through the stadium, a mix of excitement and disbelief. Unbelievable! The human Mark has forced the mighty Grothak to stagger. Is this the end of the reign of the Krelvok warrior? Is humanity ready to rise? The crowd had fallen into an unnatural silence. Mark could feel the weight of their expectations. They were no longer laughing, no longer sure of the outcome. They were waiting for something, hopping. Mark wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes locking onto Grothak, knowing that if he didn't make his move soon, this fight would be over. Grothak, still standing, took a slow step forward, his fists raised, ready to crush Mark with every ounce of his power. The alien's strength was unmatched, but his arrogance had been shaken. It was a chance Mark couldn't afford to waste. Grothak roared and lunged forward again, his fists like sledgehammers, aiming for Mark's chest. Mark darted to the side, moving with a speed that belied his exhaustion. The ground trembled beneath Grothak's feet, the sheer force of his swing sending a shockwave through the arena. Mark barely avoided the punch, his heart racing, and for a moment he saw it, a flicker of hesitation in Grothak's eyes. Mark didn't think, he just acted. With a quick pivot, Mark darted under Grothak's wide swing, slipping behind the giant warrior. Grothak swung again, too slow now, and Mark used his momentum to deliver a sharp knee to Grothak's side. The alien warrior stumbled. This time he didn't recover so quickly. The crowd's silence was deafening, and Mark felt his chest tighten. He had done it. He had made Grothak falter again, but it wasn't enough. He needed to do more. "Come on, Mark," he whispered to himself, trying to focus through the pain and exhaustion. "You can do this, just keep moving." Grothak spun around, his eyes burning with fury. "You think you've won?" he growled. "I'll show you how foolish you are, human." Mark braced himself. He knew this was it, the final push. He didn't have the luxury of a second chance. As Grothak advanced, Mark sidestepped and launched himself at the alien's leg. He grabbed Grothak's massive ankle, using his body weight to pull and twist, forcing the warrior off balance. Grothak crashed to one knee, the arena floor shaking beneath him. The crowd gasped in shock. It had never happened before. Grothak, the undefeated champion, was down, not fully but enough for Mark to see his opening. The alien grunted in pain, but Mark wasn't finished. He saw his chance, and with a deep breath, he launched himself upward, using the last of his energy to deliver a powerful punch to Grothak. Exposed jaw. The blow connected with a sickening thud. For a moment, everything went still. The crowd was holding its breath, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Grothak stumbled back, his massive body swaying as if he were about to collapse. But then, with a roar of rage, he lunged forward, desperate to finish the fight. Mark felt a cold rush of fear. Grothak's anger was a force of nature, and he had been playing with Mark this whole time. The warrior's strength was overwhelming, and in his weakened state, Mark knew he couldn't keep dodging forever. But he couldn't stop either. He had come too far. Summoning every ounce of his will, Mark darted forward again, this time aiming for Grothak's unguarded chest. With a scream of effort, Mark twisted his body, using his shoulder to drive Grothak back. The Krelvok warrior's massive form faltered, the alien's knees buckling. Mark's heart leaped. It was working. He was wearing him down. Grothak gasped, trying to regain his balance, but it was too late. Mark pressed harder, refusing to let the warrior get back up. "You," Grothak sputtered, his voice a mix of rage and disbelief. "You're just human? How?" His words trailed off as Mark, with one final push, drove him to the ground. The arena was silent for a moment, a stillness that filled every corner of the massive stadium. Then the crowd erupted. Mark stood over Grothak, breathing heavily, his legs weak beneath him. He had done it. Against all odds, against the galaxy's greatest warrior, he had won. The announcer's voice trembled with awe as it echoed through the arena. "Humanity has done it. The human Mark has defeated Grothak." Mark didn't celebrate. He couldn't. He was too exhausted. But as the cheers of the crowd filled the air, he couldn't help but smile. The impossible had happened. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. And in that moment, Mark realized one simple truth. Humans were stronger than anyone ever gave them credit for. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Mark could feel the vibrations in his bones as the arena erupted in cheers, an explosion of sound that almost overwhelmed him. But through the noise, he heard one word clearly: human. He had done it. He had beaten Grothak. His knees wobbled beneath him as he stood, the adrenaline starting to fade, leaving exhaustion and pain in its wake. His body ached from head to toe. Every muscle screamed in protest, and his heart was racing in a wild, unrelenting rhythm. He wasn't sure how he was still standing. The battle had drained him, physically and mentally, and yet here he was, victorious. Grothak lay on the ground in front of him, panting and groaning, struggling to lift himself. For the first time, the mighty champion of the Galactic Championship seemed human, vulnerable, weak. Mark couldn't believe it. He'd faced the impossible and come out on top. As the crowd's cheers grew louder, Mark felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. He had only just begun to process what had happened, but the reality was sinking in. He had fought a Krelvok warrior, an alien with superior strength and unmatched power, and he had won. Not because he was stronger, but because he was human. The announcer's voice broke through the noise, still full of shock. Mark the human has defeated Grothak. Against all odds, humanity has triumphed today. The realization was starting to hit Mark. The crowd was chanting now, calling his name, their excitement palpable. Human, human, human. The stadium was shaking with their energy. But it wasn't the crowd that Mark focused on. It wasn't the champions or the medals. It was something else, something deeper. It was the pride that filled his chest as he looked at Grothak, who was now struggling to get back to his feet, eyes wide with disbelief. Mark didn't move toward him right away. He just stood there, catching his breath, watching Grothak's failed attempts to rise. It was almost surreal. Here, in this moment, Mark was the victor. Grothak finally managed to lift himself to his knees, breathing heavily. His glare was burning with hatred, but there was something else in his eyes now. Respect, perhaps, or maybe just the recognition that Mark had earned this victory. The crowd, sensing the shift, quieted for a moment, waiting for what would happen next. Grothak's voice was low but filled with a raw, almost grudging respect. "You, human," he gasped, struggling to push himself up. "You defeated me. I never thought I'd see the day." Mark took a step forward, his muscles sore with every movement, but he couldn't stop himself. The words were already leaving his mouth before he even thought about them. "You weren't invincible, Grothak. I might not have your size, your strength, or your power, but I have something you'll never have: resilience." The Krelvok warrior's eyes widened, and for a brief moment there was something like respect in them. He didn't speak again, but Mark saw the subtle nod of acknowledgement that spoke volumes. It wasn't just about the physical battle. Mark had shown Grothak something deeper: the will of humanity to survive, to adapt, to fight against overwhelming odds. The announcer's voice boomed again, this time with excitement and awe. "The human has done it. The impossible has been achieved. Humanity's strength has been proven on the galactic stage." Mark stood, breathing heavily, allowing the weight of what had happened to sink in. He had won. But what did that really mean? Was this the end of the story, or had something more profound happened here today? He wasn't just an underdog anymore. He was a symbol. A symbol that humans, despite their physical weaknesses, could rise to any challenge, could overcome the most impossible odds. The roar of the crowd felt distant now. Mark was lost in his thoughts. He hadn't just fought Grothak for himself. He had fought for everyone back home, his family, his friends, and for every person who had ever been underestimated or counted out. He had fought for humanity, for the spirit that ran through every human being, a spirit that said, "We will not quit." Grothak, still kneeling, finally stood up straight, albeit unsteadily, and looked directly at Mark. He didn't say anything, but there was no need for words. The respect in his eyes spoke louder than anything he could say. He extended his hand toward Mark. The crowd fell silent again, and Mark, still trying to process everything, hesitated. But then, without a second thought, he stepped forward and took Grothak's hand. The stadium erupted in applause once more, not just for the victory, but for the unspoken bond between the two fighters. Mark had defeated Grothak, but more than that, he had earned the respect of the galaxy's greatest warrior. And in doing so, he had proven something greater: that humanity's true strength lay not in its power or size, but in its resilience, its heart, and its unbreakable will to survive. The arena was still filled with cheers, but Mark didn't hear them anymore. Instead, he looked up at the stars shining through the arena's domed roof, feeling a sense of accomplishment like no other. He had done it. Against all odds, he had shown the galaxy what it meant to be human. And in that moment, he knew this was just the beginning. The roar of the crowd still echoed in Mark's ears, but it felt distant now, muffled by the weight of the moment. He had won. He had done the impossible. Mark, a human, had defeated Grothak, the Krelvok warrior who had ruled the arena for years. The world had seen him as the underdog, an unworthy challenger. But now, in this moment, Mark was more than just a fighter. He was a symbol. His body ached from head to toe, every muscle sore from the brutal battle, but the exhaustion was nothing compared to the pride swelling in his chest. The crowd was still cheering, still calling his name, but Mark barely heard them. Instead, he looked down at Grothak, who was still standing there, breathing heavily, trying to regain his composure. Grothak's golden eyes were no longer filled with fury. There was something else now, something like respect. The alien warrior, once full of arrogance, was staring at Mark with an unreadable expression. The tension between them was palpable, and Mark couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph, but he didn't take the moment for granted. He knew this wasn't just about beating Grothak. It was about proving to everyone, and to himself, that humanity was more than just an afterthought in a galaxy full of stronger beings. Grothak let out a deep sigh, his voice a low rumble as he spoke. "I underestimated you, human," he said, his tone begrudging but sincere. "You've earned this." Mark stood there, unsure of what to say. It wasn't a victory he had expected to feel so conflicted about. He had trained for this moment, prepared for it, but now that it had come, the weight of what he had done was sinking in. The fight was over, but the victory felt different than he had imagined. "You," Grothak paused, shaking his head as if trying to process what had just happened. "You didn't just survive, you won." Mark could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, the weight of their expectations now settling onto his shoulders. He had been the underdog, the last person anyone thought would win, but now he was something more. The cheers were louder now, and Mark could hear them clearer than ever, but they were not for Grothak. No, they were for him. "Human, human, human." The chant spread through the arena, echoing off the walls. It was no longer mocking, it was a recognition. Mark's chest tightened with emotion. He had done it. He had faced the impossible, and he had conquered it. It wasn't just about his strength. It was about his heart, his mind, his refusal to back down in the face of insurmountable odds. And now, humanity had a victory that would be remembered for generations. As Grothak stood, his massive frame towering over Mark, he extended his hand. The crowd grew silent again, sensing the significance of the gesture. Grothak, the undefeated champion, was offering respect to a human, a gesture that had never been seen before in the arena. Mark hesitated for only a moment before he took Grothak's hand firmly in his, the gesture of respect now solidified between them. The crowd exploded into applause, but Mark barely heard it. He was still processing the enormity of what had just happened. Grothak, for all his strength and power, had fallen to someone human. And in that moment, Mark realized that this wasn't just about fighting for survival. This was about fighting for recognition, for a place in a galaxy that had never truly believed in humans. Grothak's voice cut through his thoughts. "You've earned the right to stand here," he said, his words heavy with meaning. "But remember this, human, you are now the one who carries the banner of humanity's strength. You've shown the galaxy what we can do." Mark nodded, not sure how to respond. His victory was not just his own anymore. It belonged to all of humanity. The thought made his heart swell with pride. "Thank you," Mark said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. He wasn't sure if Grothak had ever said those words to anyone, but the sincerity in his tone made it clear that this wasn't just a formal gesture. It was real. The crowd slowly began to quiet down, their cheers still echoing as they continued to chant his name. "Human!" They were no longer laughing, they were celebrating. Mark turned toward the crowd, his body still shaking with the adrenaline of the fight. He didn't feel like a winner in the traditional sense. The pain in his muscles, the exhaustion in his bones told him otherwise. But what he did feel was something deeper. He felt a sense of accomplishment, of pride. He had proven that no matter how small or weak someone might seem in comparison to the mighty, they could still rise up and fight. They could still change the game. As the announcer's voice boomed, "And the winner is Mark, the human who has just defeated Grothak." Mark raised his arms in acknowledgement. He wasn't sure what would happen next. What did life look like after a victory like this? But one thing was certain, his life and humanity's place in the galaxy had just changed forever. Mark wasn't just a human anymore, he was a fighter, and the universe would never forget him. The arena was still alive with the deafening sound of applause, but Mark stood frozen, caught in a moment that felt like it would last forever. His body was aching, bruised, and battered, but his heart was racing with exhilaration. He had done it. He had defeated Grothak, the champion, the undefeated warrior. And now, for the first time, Mark was the one standing victorious. But as the crowd roared, Mark felt a strange mix of emotions wash over him. There was pride, yes, but also a deep sense of disbelief. He had come here thinking he was just an underdog, a human lost among giants. And now he was the giant. The very thought was overwhelming. Grothak, still standing across from him, looked exhausted. The once-proud warrior was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling with every breath. He had fought hard, but now Mark could see the cracks in the Krelvok warrior's armor. Grothak was no longer the invincible force he had been at the start. The crowd's cheers faded slightly as the announcer's voice echoed through the arena. "Mark, the human, has done the impossible. He's taken down Grothak, the champion." The announcer's voice was filled with awe, but even more powerful was the hum of excitement that still vibrated through the stadium. The crowd wasn't just cheering for the fight. They were cheering for the message it sent. Mark's mind raced as he slowly approached Grothak, still unsure of what came next. He had won the fight, but what did that mean? He wasn't a warrior. He didn't belong in the arena, but somehow here he was. Here they were, humans defying the odds. Grothak looked up at Mark, his yellow eyes still fierce, but now there was a hint of something different in them. Respect, perhaps. "I didn't think a human could do it," Grothak said, his voice low and heavy with fatigue. "I didn't think you could do it." Mark stood tall, despite the exhaustion gnawing at his bones. He looked down at the Krelvok warrior and for the first time saw him as something other than an enemy. There was no more hate in Grothak's eyes, no more arrogance. There was just an acknowledgement, an understanding. "I'm not like you," Mark said, his voice firm but calm. "But that doesn't make me weak." Grothak grunted, but there was no hostility in the sound. "No, it makes you something else." The alien warrior struggled to his feet, but Mark could see the weariness in his every movement. "You've proven that humans are more than just creatures to be mocked. You're stronger than I thought." For a long moment they stood there, locked in an unspoken exchange. Mark's mind was still racing, but one thing was clear. He had changed the galaxy's view of humanity. He had done what no one else thought possible. He had taken on the champion, and he had won. "Human," Grothak said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of a warrior's respect. "You've earned the right to be called a warrior. I never thought I'd say it, but you fought with heart, with something more than strength." Mark swallowed, unsure of how to respond. He had never considered himself a warrior. He was just a person trying to survive in a strange, often unforgiving world. But today he had fought with everything he had, and somehow that had been enough. Before he could answer, the announcer's voice rang out again, filling the silence that had settled between them. "And now we have witnessed the impossible. Humanity's strength, resilience, and determination have been proven on the grandest stage. The champion has fallen, and the victor is human." The crowd roared again, but this time the cheers felt different. It wasn't just excitement. It was admiration. It was a recognition that humanity was no longer just an afterthought in the vastness of the galaxy. Mark stood still, soaking it all in. He wasn't just a fighter. He was a symbol of human strength, of the resilience that ran through the veins of every person on Earth. The galaxy had seen what they were capable of now. Grothak stepped forward, his massive hand extended toward Mark. The gesture was simple but profound. It wasn't just a handshake, it was an offering of respect. Mark took a deep breath and reached out, accepting the hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words feeling like they were more for himself than for Grothak. He had done it. He had fought for something greater than himself. The crowd's chants of "human, human, human" filled the air, and Mark looked up, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. He wasn't just a human anymore. He was a hero, and the galaxy had witnessed it. As Mark stood there, hand in hand with Grothak, he realized that the fight was only the beginning. Humanity had proven its worth, and now there was no limit to what they could achieve. The arena had quieted down now, the cheers still echoing faintly in the background, but Mark barely noticed. He stood in the center, surrounded by the endless sea of faces, but his mind was focused on one thing. He had done it. The impossible had been achieved. He had defeated Grothak, the champion, the legend, and the crowd, once filled with mockery and laughter, was now silent, only offering admiration and respect. Mark wasn't sure what he was feeling. His body was sore, every inch of him aching from the brutal fight. But beneath the exhaustion, there was a deep sense of pride that burned through him like a fire. He had been pushed to his limits, and still he had fought. Still, he had won. And now the whole galaxy knew that humans were not to be underestimated. Grothak, the once indomitable warrior, was no longer standing in front of Mark with hatred in his eyes. Instead, there was a new light in them, something Mark had never expected to see. It was the look of respect. Grothak, breathing heavily, finally spoke, his voice softer than before. "You've earned this, human." Mark gave him a small, tired smile. "I didn't fight just for me. I fought for everyone back home." The alien warrior nodded slowly. "And you've shown them what they didn't believe. Humanity isn't just weak, you have strength. I see that now." Mark glanced around at the crowd, feeling their eyes on him. The roar of applause from the stands was still ringing in his ears, but this time it wasn't just noise, it was a wave of energy. Something had shifted in the galaxy today. The view of humans had changed, and he had been the one to do it. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. He had fought for every human who had been doubted, for every person who had been told they weren't strong enough. And now he had proven that strength was more than just physical power. It was about heart, resilience, and the will to keep going even when the odds were against you. The announcer's voice crackled across the arena, still filled with awe. "The unthinkable has happened, folks. Mark, the human, has taken down Grothak, the undefeated champion. Humanity has won." The crowd exploded again, and Mark finally let himself take a deep breath. This was the moment when everything had changed. He wasn't just a fighter now, he was a hero, and the galaxy had witnessed it. The laughter had stopped. The mockery had stopped. And humanity was standing tall, side by side with the greatest warriors of the galaxy. Grothak stepped toward him, extending his hand, a simple but meaningful gesture. Mark stared at it for a second, still processing what was happening. Grothak, the fiercest warrior in the arena, was offering him respect. He wasn't just acknowledging his strength in battle, he was acknowledging humanity itself. Mark took Grothak's hand, and the crowd fell silent. The gesture spoke louder than any words could. This wasn't just a victory for Mark, it was a victory for everyone back home on Earth. It was a victory for every human who had ever been told they were too small, too weak, or too insignificant to compete on such a grand scale. "You've shown the galaxy what humans are made of," Grothak said, his voice deep and steady. "You may not have my strength, but you've got something even more important. You've got heart." Mark looked up into Grothak's eyes, and for the first time there was no rivalry, no hatred, just mutual respect. "Thank you," Mark said quietly, not just to Grothak, but to everyone who had ever doubted him. "I didn't do this alone. We're all in this together." Grothak nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Then, human, we are not so different after all." Mark's heart swelled with emotion. He had come to this arena thinking he was just a pawn in a game, someone to be crushed beneath the power of the galaxy's greatest warriors. But here he was, standing not just as a fighter, but as a symbol of what humanity could accomplish. He had made the impossible happen. He had changed the narrative, and in doing so, he had earned his place among the stars. As the crowd's cheers grew louder, Mark raised his arms in a silent acknowledgement of their respect. The energy of the arena swirled around him, and for the first time he truly felt that he belonged here. The journey had been long, filled with moments of doubt and fear, but it had all led to this moment of triumph. And as he stood there amidst the deafening cheers, Mark knew that humanity's path had only just begun. This fight had been the first step, but there would be more to come. More battles, more challenges, and more triumphs. The galaxy had seen what humanity could do, and Mark was just the beginning. The announcer's voice once again echoed through the arena, but this time it wasn't filled with disbelief. It was filled with pride. "And there you have it, folks. A human has risen to the top. Humanity's strength has proven itself in the Galactic Championship. This will go down in history." Mark smiled. He had made history, and he was ready to make even more.